The ether of the third shard had seeped into the soil, priming the source for the next calamity. With the primal Bahamut imprisoned within the artificial moon, Dalamud, Xande sought to harness the very ether of the sun and the primal both, so as to tear through the boundary between worlds, opening a massive void gate to the 13th shard. With this act, he would welcome the Cloud of Darkness and her armies of void sent into the source. Reeling from the horror of his plan, Doga and Une gifted unto two clones their spirits, in case they failed to stop the Emperor, and moved to intercept him before he could carry out his plan. Meanwhile, the citizens of Allag rose up in desperate resistance against Xande. What started as small independent pockets of resistance rapidly swelled into an army. Led by warriors of light of the day, they stormed the Imperial Palace and drove off what little support remained for Xande amongst the once mighty Allagan military, and succeeded in forcing the Mad Emperor from the palace and into the Crystal Tower. The clones of Doga and Une, now within the tower, were unable to reach Xande and his cohort in time, before he ordered the emergency activation of Dalamud, remotely transferring all the stored ether within to the Crystal Tower, suffusing it with more than enough energy to open the Void Gate. But it never did. Xande and the scientists of Allag had made a critical error in their calculations. While the tower was able to withstand the blast, it only did so by flooding the land below with energy. The ground was not so fortunate. Not built to withstand such a concentration of energy, the ground beneath the tower instantly crumbled and collapsed, swallowing the tower and Xande along with it. While the army of the resistance cheered and celebrated, they soon found their victory short-lived. As the tower sank into the earth, the abundance of earth-aspected ether triggered a chain reaction which shattered the land. Mountains were toppled, and the land was rent asunder. In a matter of moments, the once proud empire of Allag was laid to waste. And as the Crystal Tower continued to sink into the ground, Amon invoked a powerful spell, freezing time within the tower, and placing all within into a deep slumber. The Allagan Empire lay in ruin. Civilization had relied almost entirely on the Crystal Tower for energy to function. Without it, the whole of the Empire was plunged into chaos. Machines ground to a halt. Lights ceased to function. Lines of communication and transportation were cut, and those on artificially levitated areas, such as Azizla, were trapped without hope of resupply. Unable to maintain their great machines, the bioweapons developed there broke free of their cages and rampaged across the floating facility. It would remain uninhabited for the next 5,000 years. The calamity claimed the lives of most of those in the Empire, including the royal bloodline. However, one of Xande's progeny had survived, the Princess Salina. Quick-witted, she knew immediately what the fall of the tower meant for the Empire, and that it had only been buried, not destroyed. Lacking the means to destroy the tower, she drew upon the power granted to her through Xande's unholy pact with the Void. So long as her bloodline endured, there would be a force to keep the Cloud of Darkness in check. Using what remained of Allagan biotechnology, she transferred her bloodline and power to a trusted ally of what would eventually become the Mikote G tribe, hoping that it would never again be required. The world was shattered. The bonds which held the Empire together, now severed, cities and villages found themselves forced into isolation. With no simple way to communicate over the vast distances, the Allagan dialect fractured and fragmented into hundreds of new languages. What remained of Allagan technology served only to remind mankind of what its hubris had wrought. And so mankind spurred the knowledge that had led them down the road of destruction, and decreed that the knowledge of life's mysteries were best left to the gods. From then, mankind looked backwards for protection. As time passed, delving into such mysteries was seen as a sin, and the pursuit of higher knowledge was shunned. Books were burned en masse, and children were left uneducated. The technology that had given rise to the greatest empire the Shattered Source had ever seen, and taken mankind to the very stars, was abandoned. What technology survived the calamity was destroyed, toppled, or buried. Those survivors who retained knowledge from the old world were exiled or killed outright. Fear in the heavens was absolute, and the once proud nation that had been Allag existed only in scripture, a fable used to scare and teach children of the folly of man. For 1,500 years, the silent war against knowledge would continue. The church rose to an even more prominent position than in the Second Astral Era. Any knowledge that reached the populace was filtered, rewritten, and manipulated by the church. The church went so far as to develop a new alphabet for their holy scriptures, taught only to men and women of the church, to further keep the masses ignorant and solidify their control over the realm. An alphabet that would one day become the Eorzean alphabet. As ignorance and fear held the world in its iron grip, groups of heroes arose in the southeastern part of Ilsabard. No less than 8 times did these bastions of light rise to defend the people and restore balance to the world. Perhaps the most famous of these groups was led by King Delita. After the death of the last heir of the Atkasha line, Ivalice found itself without a ruler. In an attempt to claim the now empty throne, the Orders of the Southern Sky and the Northern Sky went to war under the banners of the Black Lion and White Lion, respectively. This war led to a bloody stalemate until Delita, acting at the behest of the Church of Glabados, set out with the company of knights to recover the Zodiac Stones. Some versions of this legend tell of 6 stones, while others claim it was 1,000. Whatever the case, these stones were made from the substance known as auracite. These stones are credited with the destruction of the City of Gods, Mulond, and granting Delita the power to bring order to the chaos plaguing his kingdom. However, while this occurred, another group, led by Ramza Beouf, waged a shadow campaign to uncover the source of the auracite. Tracking the source of the stones to the Orban Monastery, Ramza and his party discovered the Angel of Blood, Ultima, within. In an era ruled by fear, mankind's dread had given way to reverence, feeding Ultima's soul until she gained a sense of self. Now a living primal, Ramza and his party were unable to destroy the High Seraph, but instead gave their very souls to imprison her. They would remain within the monastery, with the hopes that one day another adamant soul would come to free them and vanquish the evil creature permanently. For the next 1,500 years, mankind would live in darkness, until the ice crept forth from the northern lands, wrapping the world in its frozen embrace as seas turned to ice and the world fell into an eternal winter, or so it seemed. The 5th Umbral era had finally come.